Everyone, hope you're doing well. Back during the international break, we asked our subscribers for suggestions of content, and a couple of people said, can we have a specific video regarding Fllkrug, what he's good at, what he's not so good at, how should West Ham play in order to get the best out of him? And I've already given my opinion about him. However, I've only seen him a handful of times in the Bundesliga each season, so I thought, do you know what? I'm going to ask a fellow Aberdonian who has watched him far more than I have and get his thoughts. So, Derek, thank you very much for joining me. How are you?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to chatting about a player who I think we could classify as a bit of a late developer.
We'll get into that more. Derek is the voice of Bundesliga for ESPN viewers. He's kept me company without really realizing it. He's kept me company for many games over the years while commentating on the Bundesliga. But let's get straight into Fllkrug joining West Ham. When you saw this transfer occurring, what was your initial reaction on it?
I wasn't entirely surprised, although on a different level, the choice of West Ham, I think, maybe raised a few eyebrows. And I say that because Niclas Füllkrug is a player who's been around for a long time. And you would probably, until a couple of years ago, have described him as something of a striking journeyman. You know, he had certainly made the journey in German football, you know, playing for the likes of Nuremberg and Fürth, and then in a more high-profile way for Werder Bremen latterly, but for Hannover. He's from Hannover originally. I just felt, and I always had one or two doubts about the move to Dortmund, I just felt that the fit wasn't 100% there in Dortmund on a number of different levels. First of all, he had come from Werder Bremen and he had played as part of a striking duo with Marvin Duksch, and the two of them complemented past tense each other very well. They also got on very well. And my fear was in Dortmund were not a crossing side at all. And he's not necessarily, I think it would be dangerous with Fllkrug to get overly one-dimensional about him. He's not just a striker who's good in the air. He's quite good in the air, but he does other things as well. But I did feel that to get the best out of him, he had to have somebody to play off a little bit, or he had to have a team that was committed to giving him enough crosses for him to profit. Now, he did okay with Dortmund. I don't think you would write off the season and say it was bad or anything like that. But I think his words are quite interesting now. And, you know, he chose his words quite carefully while making his point. He does that quite well, actually. He's a senior pro. He's highly respected. And he said there wasn't a great evidence of trust latterly. And Dortmund wanted to sign Serhou Guirassy, who had netted 28 goals in 28 Bundesliga matches for Stuttgart, a little bit younger, maybe a bit more dynamic. And I think he, you know, read the signals and felt that, yeah, this is a good time to leave and try something new. And in his case, a new adventure.
For those West Ham fans who perhaps haven't seen too much of Fllkrug, in regards to his strengths, his attributes, the good things about his game, how would you describe him?
Very forward-thinking, good all-round striker. You know, you wouldn't look at him and say he can't do this or he can't do that. You know, he can hold the ball up. He can play with his back to goal. He can bring others into it. He can finish in all manner of ways. He can be good in the air. You know, I would say that Niclas Füllkrug is the sort of player who will not let his team down. You would never look at him and think, oh, he's not trying. But I would say he's just a hair short of the very top level of strikers. He's to me a very good striker. He's not in the category of great striker, but sometimes very good is what you need, you know. And you know, West Ham paid a lot of money for him. They obviously had watched a lot of him, and you know, they knew all about him going into the deal. But I think what I would look at with Fllkrug is what he's done for Germany. And this has all come to him late in football life. You know, a few years ago, nobody would have thought of Niclas Füllkrug as a Germany player. You know, that is the fact of the matter, which tells you about the extent to which he has improved his game. And he certainly improved it greatly that season a couple of years ago when he was the joint top scorer in the Bundesliga together with Christopher Nkunku on 16 goals. It was a low figure. It was a low number for the Torjägerkanone, as it's known, the award that goes to the top scorer in the Bundesliga. And of course, you have Harry Kane there now. And, with Harry Kane there, you're looking at somewhere in the 30s being the number you would need in order to dislodge him from that award. But he won it with 16 or on a joint basis. But what he's done with Germany is actually, I think, worthy of a lot of praise because, again, I come back to that phrase that I used. He has not let Germany down. I can't remember him letting Germany down. And in fact, this was the big debate during the Euros within Germany. Should he be playing from the start rather than Kai Havertz? And Julian Nagelsmann tended to prefer Kai Havertz. He thought he was a better all-round footballer. And I think saw the wisdom of having Fllkrug come on as a substitute and making an impact that way. And that tended to be the way that Germany went about their business. So, yeah, I think there's a lot to like about him. Weaknesses, no obvious weaknesses, but just that little bit short of the very top echelon of strikers, but still a very good one.
I was going to ask you about the weaknesses. Can you elaborate on those? What concerns? If you were talking to a West Ham fan now in the street, and he said, "What concerns should I have, Derek?" What would you say to him?
I wouldn't have major concerns, but I would say there are times when you might forget about him in a game. He's that sort of player sometimes. If you don't involve him enough, then it might appear that he's not in the game. So you do have to find ways to involve him. Having said that, he can set other players up. He's not a selfish player in that sense. He's selfish in the sense he wants to score goals, but he's not a sulker out there on the pitch. But I would say that would be the main thing. So it's incumbent upon the team that employs him, in this case it's West Ham United, to basically have a style of play that gets the best out of him.
Yeah, I was going to say, to summarise then, how do you get the best out of him? Would it be fair to say that you've almost come across three options there? First of all, it's get plenty crosses into the box and supply him from out wide. Second of all is with a partnership. So he's got another striker, or at least a second striker / number 10 that's very close to him in order to work off him. Or third, which is more of a German thing rather than a club thing, which is play quite high up the pitch, I think. I think he works with Germany because they don't mind putting the crosses in, but they can get really technical players like Wirtz and Musiala quite close to him, so that there's never more than 10, 15 yards away from the striker. Because I think his hold-up play is fantastic. I really like it. And I think one of my frustrations with him when we played Bournemouth was it was almost like 40-yard launches to his head when he's having to win it in there. And I thought, hang on, he's better than this. I thought it was a bit of an insult, actually. I thought, get it to the guy's chest or his feet, because then he can turn and play players off and get the likes of Bowen and Kudus into the game that way. But how would you think West Ham, what do West Ham have to do to get the best out of Fllkrug? Because this has been a problem position for West Ham for many years now, this striker. Someone that eventually rocked up at Dortmund was Sebastian Haller. We had him, that didn't work out. Gianluca Scamacca came for the season and went back to Italy. So we've had some big profile strikers come in, Derek, and we've just not been able to get them working. Granted, under previous manager, got Lopetegui now, but what does he need to do so that the Fllkrug transfer becomes a success rather than what feels like almost like an inevitable notch in the striker post at West Ham?
Yeah, I like your description of what Germany tried to do, and of course, by extension, what they do with him, which is to have higher starting positions. And you're right, that is a very German way to talk about the game, the distances between the different component parts of a team. And if Fllkrug finds himself, way distant from the next component part, to put it that way, then, he's probably not going to prosper. I think if you're going to have a striking partner, it has to be somebody who clearly is, I'm not going to say the opposite of him, but somebody who can bring his qualities out. And I mentioned Marvin Duksch in Bremen. He did all that. Duksch is the sort of player who you would variously describe as, tricky, has a little bit of an eye for a chip ball or for something slightly unorthodox, something off the cuff. And that seemed to suit Fllkrug really well. He understood his movements, and they called themselves the Ugly Ducklings because neither of them were particularly fashionable, to look at. But they had a way of playing, and they made that work. Dortmund, as I mentioned, that was certainly a concern for me, that Dortmund were one of the the teams least inclined in the Bundesliga to cross the ball. So I thought, okay, if he's not going to have a striking partner, and, for the most part, he didn't. And he's not going to have these crosses coming in. How do you get the best out of him? So Dortmund, of course, also fairly high up and, had players who, even though they weren't necessarily strikers, could dovetail with the people like Daniel Malen, people like Karim Adeyemi, Marco Reus when he was there. He's no longer there, legendary figure in Dortmund. But as I say, it worked to a point. And you would look at his numbers and you would say, yeah, these are sort of Niclas Füllkrug numbers. These are the numbers that he's produced throughout his career in the top division and in the second division as well. He wasn't necessarily a scorer in the second division who would wow you with numbers. So his overall contribution is usually there. But I would say that's what West Ham have to come down on. Again, just my opinion from far away, but having observed Niclas Füllkrug, West Ham would have to come down on one side of that in terms of how they want to get the best out of him, whether it's with a partner, but with the right partner, or with crossing a bit more, or with having more of a kind of a block around him so he's not isolated.
In regards to the transfer fee, now it depends on what you read and who you believe as to what his transfer fee is. But let's just go down the middle and say it was around about 23, 24 million pounds. Have West Ham overpaid?
They probably have. And I say that just because, in German football, it's kind of become the norm for this to be the perception that there's a price and then there's a Premier League price, on top of that. Because, let's face it, the Premier League is the richest league in the world and they can afford to do that. They can afford, I'm not going to say afford to make mistakes, but they can afford to make sure they get the player they want. And I think at 31, I think Dortmund would look at that and go, yeah, that's fair. That's that makes a lot of sense. And when you combine the fact that he didn't really feel completely appreciated in Dortmund. He was there a short time and, it was quite an exciting time, a bit of a wild ride because, on the one hand, you make it into the Champions League final against all expectations, and he had a big part in that. On the other hand, you finish a disappointing fifth in the Bundesliga, and that is true as well. So it was this kind of up and down season for Borussia Dortmund and overshadowed completely in Germany by Leverkusen and what they did, winning the title and the cup, winning the title without losing a game. Stuttgart, who made terrific strides to finish second. Bayern only third, and then Leipzig even better than Borussia Dortmund. So I think it was an odd year to be there. And I think he wanted something different too. He's never sampled England before. Been struck by what he said about it just recently. He said he feels that it's more physical in England. It's more dynamic, in his words. But this struck me as well. He said in some ways it's not as tactical as Germany. He said in some ways, and he used the example of possession. He said in England, teams don't sort of just, take possession as part of the strategy of the game. It's sort of almost constant, okay, where can we find the space? Whereas in Germany, teams will often sort of take a breather and have a spell of possession for their own reasons, to try to reestablish game control. And I think, that's something I don't watch as much Premier League as I used to because I'm completely immersed in the German football world. And I noticed this myself as well. So I think it's interesting that he's said, yeah, more physical, arguably more dynamic, but less tactical.
That worried me as a West Ham fan when he said that. It was a small alarm bell going. Bearing in mind he's only been here a month, a little bit more than a month, and there's been an international break in that period as well. But even after just that time, that was his conclusion already. And we've got like a new head coach in, and you've got one of the star signings, the striker coming in, saying, "No, it's not as tactical over here." It's like, oh no, that's not what I wanted to hear, and that made me worried that what we've discussed about not playing to his strengths, that made me worried for that, which is it's not really going to be how do we get the best out of Niclas Füllkrug. It's going to be what's best for the team overall, and those who don't fit it are just going to have to suffer a little bit, which I feel like was the conclusion of his time at Dortmund to some extent. It was almost like you're not good enough to build a team around you. You're just going to have to be the guy up front, and hopefully it'll work to some extent. Yeah. And I got a bit of a shiver when I read that from Fllkrug, his comments. I thought, nah, this is not what I wanted to hear. More physical, yes, it's always going to be, but less tactical. That's a comment I could have done without hearing, truth be told.
Yeah.
Derek, crystal ball time.
Mm.
Do you think Fllkrug will be a success at West Ham?
I would say, having watched him for a while, I'm a fan. I mean, I'm a fan of Niclas Füllkrug. I'm also a fan of the personality, Niclas Füllkrug.
Yeah.
You know, I think he's a good guy to have in a team. You know, I don't know whether it's done the rounds with fans of the Hammers, but you know, his nickname is Fllkrug, which basically means gap, translated into English, and that has a double meaning because, of course, he has the gap between his front teeth, and has had that for a while. He doesn't really like that nickname too much, but it also can be used in terms of finding the gap in the opposition. He prefers Fllkrug, but he's always very good natured. He's the kind of person who colleagues in the media always look to for interviews, which I always think says a lot about a player. And maybe it just comes with age and comes with being seasoned to a certain extent. But he's the sort of player in good times and in bad times who will face the media and will face questions, and you know, probably give him a little bit of time in England, in a new country, with a language that he's not necessarily speaking or hasn't spoken week in, week out before. But he is a good pro, so I would back him to do well. I just think it might take a little bit of time. It might take a little bit of working out on all fronts. But I don't look at Niclas Füllkrug and think to myself, there's somebody who that's just not going to work. That's somebody who couldn't possibly even adjust his own game to help West Ham. As I say, I think, you know, he was really good in this 4-4-2, very simple 4-4-2 at Bremen with Dux, who was his good mate. And they played quite simply, you know, not in a complex way tactically. And it did work. So, yeah, we shall see. I'll be watching with interest.
Right, last question then. Away from Fllkrug, actually, in regards to Tim Steidten, I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on him. Obviously, a big part of Leverkusen's success. However, been at West Ham for just over a year now. So I just wondered what your opinion on Steidten was. It's a very simple, basic question. The floor is yours, Derek.
Yeah, good guy, Tim Steidten. I think he's somebody who's highly thought of. You know, if you look back at Leverkusen, I think, is a good discussion point on this because, you know, they won the title last season, and most people rightly will say, well, they had Xavi Alonso and they had Granit Xhaka, and, you know, my goodness, you know, they were the two key figures in it all. They were sort of the final important chess pieces. But you have to look back over a number of years on the building blocks that were put in place there. And, you know, Simon Rolfes is the sporting director, and Tim was there during those years when they were getting those building blocks in and understanding what a player like Edmond Tapsoba could do, getting him from Portugal as they did. Jeremy Frimpong, who, you know, was at Celtic and promising young player, but no more than that. But they saw the potential, and now they've got a player who's worth, you know, I don't know, probably £50 million or something like that. So yeah, I think you have to give him credit for what he's done. He's a likable guy. He's an ambitious kind of guy too. And, you know, for a while he was mentioned in connection with a lot of other clubs. And I think, you know, Niclas Füllkrug has made it very clear that he was a big reason why he decided for West Ham in the end. You know, he knew him obviously a little bit, maybe not that well, but he knew him. And he said what was explained to him about West Ham by Tim was really important in the decision-making process. So, yeah, I would really only have good things to say.
Derek's been humble here. Derek has spent time with Tim Steidten. He just didn't want to throw that out there, but I'm going to chuck that in there for context. So when you say he's a good guy, people go, how do you know? Derek has spent time in the company of Tim Steidten. But Derek, thank you so much. That's been a pleasure. Thoroughly enjoyed that, actually. And maybe we'll catch up towards the end of the season and have a little chat about Fllkrug again. Hopefully it's a success. But you guys at home, if you've enjoyed this, please do drop a like on it by clicking thumbs up. Subscribe to Hammers Chat. And if you're like myself and you are tuning into the Bundesliga and you recognize this man's voice, I'll put the links to social media in the description below so you can follow Derek and see what grumblings he's got on social media in regards to all things German football. But seriously, Derek, thank you. Absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.